Good evening, everybody, and welcome. So let's call this meeting to order. Looks like right at 5 o'clock p.m. straight up. All right. Ms. Hill, you want to lead us in the pledge this evening and our moment of silence?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. All right, moving on to section 3, discussion items, academic support updates. Dr. Reynolds, you want to frame this one for us?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Well, we've got a busy agenda to get through for the next few hours as we start off with a academic support update. We just wanted to share with the board a little bit about what we're doing in summer school and transitioning to the new school year and some of the things we're working on to fill in some of the gaps and make sure that our students are ready to be successful in their next grade level. So we've asked Mr. Moss to lead us in that discussion.
Make sure. Thank you, Dr. Reynolds, President Sandoval, members of the board. Just to give you a quick update, I know this is kind of the transition from our health data update to what we're going to do in student support to kind of help them move forward. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about is how do we get kids to be more successful, right? Obviously, COVID had an impact. How do we get them to be more successful in the short term? And it's become a process where we really only talked about two things that we really want to work on, and that's becoming the idea that when we had a conversation with teachers and among ourselves that we really want to have two different things. First, you have to increase the time, which is down there at the bottom. We'll talk about summer school, or you have to become more efficient within the classroom every day to get kids to be more successful, and that's a process where we really want to change from teaching to the whole group, teaching a whole group at one time, one size fits all, to a system where we actually are identifying the individual needs of every student and meeting the needs of every student in terms of what's there. How do we find out what they can do themselves and move them forward at their own pace as fast and quickly as we can in that process? And so when we look at that, we talk about the extended time. We're really talking about our June and July timeframe. We're looking at our summer school programs. We're looking at our Jumpstart programs. We're looking at what's happening during the school year, but it also extends into the regular school year, and we'll talk about some of those programs too, where we run 21st century grants, where we have after-school tutoring. We have some Title I funds that we use for after-school tutoring, and so it's really the opportunity for us to identify the needs of kids and give them extra time or to become more efficient what they're working on actually during the school day. The second piece of this, we are really talking about efficiency of learning. It really comes back to doing some things that we haven't really done in the past, and that's really start changing the idea of how do we change the structures, how do we change the teaching methods so that we're really able to identify the needs of individual kids. And so we use some terms, and differentiation is one where we try to teach students differently, we test them differently, we do things that match their learning style, some of that process. We work to embed technology into the classroom. We learned a lot during COVID about how to use technology to become more efficient, and how to get kids to be able to work at their own pace and learn without necessarily having the teacher standing right in front of them. And the third piece there is how do we do small group instruction? How are we able to put some kids on the computer, some kids working with a teacher, other kids working with an aide or with a resource teacher that keeps every kid active and every kid engaged for the whole time that they're there. The second piece there is identifying some concepts and some key concepts. We use the term priority standards, and we all know that algebra, for example, has a standard list that's about this wide, right? And what we really want to know is, can the kid move and pass algebra, but he also how can he be successful in geometry? And so we've been going through and identifying those things that are the priority standards, those things that we know they have to have in order to move from third grade to fourth grade to fifth grade, sixth grade to seventh grade, whatever it is, we're identifying those priority standards. And while we're not discounting the others, what we're really doing is let's make sure that every kid has the ability to do these specific things as they move through. And then the last part, again, is we're going to talk about how we can identify what each student knows and what each student needs to be helped with. Okay? An example would be, and I guess the comment that we use, and I use this all the time with teachers, and that is, you become inefficient when you try to teach students things they already know. Right? Why am I wasting my time teaching you something you already know? And so one of the processes that we've done is we've really put in a system of some testing and some feedback to teachers and using some data to identify some specific things that each student actually knows and what they don't know, so that I can become more focused and more intentional in what I'm trying to teach the student as they move through the process. And I'll use some examples here, and I'll give you some pieces of information in that to help you, right? So one of the things that we had, and I switched the table and didn't move forward. So these are kind of the tests that we've kind of built into our student assessment plan. And it really is a rebuilding. It really is a rebuilding of a system that we had in place before COVID. And as COVID kicked in, it became more and more difficult to give benchmarks, move around, kind of work with some of those processes, get kids to be able to sign up. How do we take them online? How do we take them at home? How do we take them in person? All those things became difficult for us to get real good data on what kids know. And so we put these in place, and basically we used 3 different tests. The first one is iReady, and iReady Reading and iReady Math is a diagnostic test. It is computer adaptive. So a student who, let's just use 4th grade or 2nd grade, is not reading on grade level, it will continue to lower the questions until they find what level they actually are successful at, and then they'll build from there. So it doesn't just say, it gives them the opportunity to be successful because it continues to move them down if they need to. If they can move up quicker, they move them up quicker. So it'll give them 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, depending upon what's there, to identify what they're able to do and what they're able not to do. Our 2nd one there is our Transcend benchmarking testing. Transcend benchmarking testing, again, is a system that allows us to give students tests. We give it 3 times a year. It takes about 40 minutes, 45 minutes in a class period. It gives us probably data related to the domains. In other words, what a student can do related to AASA and how they're going to do on the AASA test. We are in the process right now of developing those correlations. I'm waiting with bated breath to see what our AASA test scores are on Wednesday, so I can begin to connect the Transcend test to the AASA test to make sure that they are aligned and we're getting good information from them. We looked at 3rd grade. They seem to be working out. But what this really does for us is that it is, the other piece that it really gives instant feedback to the teacher. They take the test and let's say we take the test here and we finish at 5:30. By 5:40, they already have the data back that's already been tested and corrected and given back to the teacher and said, this is what they know, this is what they don't know, and moving the process forward. In the high schools, we use the course assessments and unit assessments, and we depend on the teachers through SchoolNet to work those processes out and kind of identify what individual students know or they don't know. And I'm going to give you an example, because what I really want to establish is we've worked with summer school this year to make it very focused and very intentional in terms of what we're teaching. And so on your handout, and I gave you a handout that looks like this because I'm going to put this up on the board, but I want you to be able to read through it when it kind of goes through, when the picture comes up. But this is one of the reports that we give to teachers, and this happens to be a 3rd grade class, and this is a iReady test, and this is their winter scores. And basically what that first line tells me is that this is a 3rd grader who took the test and scored on level 2. So reality, he is 1 grade level below. If you notice the yellow, he is 1 grade level below where he should be. He took and he got a red. He got a level 1 in algebra and algebraic thinking. He got a 2 in geometry. He got a 3, which is mid-grade level 3, which is where he should be in measurements and data. and he got a level 1 in numbers and operations based upon the red and the color in terms of what's there. Now, we have this information for every student that took the test. This happens to be one class, right, that we took the test in the winter. And so as a teacher, when I sit down and I've invited these students that walk into my class, let's say for summer school, I'm able to identify which groups I can work with and what student needs to work on. For example, that first student needs to work on algebraic and algebraic thinking. Numbers and operations is where we're going to spend our time because we know those are the two key factors that make you successful in 4th grade, but it also then gives us the information that when I start pulling small groups, I can just pull a small group that says, let's put all the red together in a small group for each of those columns and let them work together in what I'm able to teach them because I know that they all have similar difficulties or similar areas of need that they work through. Okay. The second page there that you have is the Transcend data. And this happens to be an 8th grade score. And on this grade, it actually gives us 5 different levels. It gives us level 5, which says they were predicted to exceed the AASA test. A 4 says they're going to meet. A 3 says that they're partially going to meet. And you can read what the other ones approach. And then the next one says partially meet. And then the last one, right, is will not meet the expectations. And so by color, you can look at the individual things there and kind of see what each student needs to work on. That Transcend Spring score, by the way, we know that 400 is basically the target score. So when you see a student at 395, they're pretty close. When you see a student at 469, I think is the green one, you can see that they're way above what the standard is at that point in time. And again, each of these gives me information about what the students know. That first one, by the way, is exponents and equations. The next one is geometry. And then we have number systems, and the last one is functions. And again, this is their spring Transcend test, so we're able to identify what that student can work on, what he needs to work on. So we would invite, again, those probably the orange and the red and some of the yellows to summer school. We would know what to work on specifically with that student as they work through the summer school. They can work specifically on those things with the teachers. And the teachers are aware of this, and they use this regularly. We give this test in the fall. We give this test right around Christmas time and right around spring break as kind of a measure of success as each piece, as the student is able to move the process forward. For the high schools, and if you look at your next page there, this is actually a breakdown that comes out of SchoolNet, which is where we issue our tests. And these students then are actually broken down by standard. And so you can see the students on the left, what their score was, and then they can get a score for each standard that is tested on that course assessment. And again, as I start working through these, we identify those priority standards. So let's just say that, and I'm just making this up, but let's just say that the first column there is the most important one to move on to be successful in geometry. Then I'm going to make sure that I get those kids who got the 50% on the 1 out of 2 questions, then I'm going to make sure that they get those correct, and I'm going to work with them individually on that part of the process. And so it becomes, again, for a principal or for a teacher, it becomes a very intentional, very specific, and very data-driven, intentional process of focusing on what the student knows and what gaps we have to fill in order to make them successful for the next grade level. Okay. Now, time-wise, summer school, and again, targeted summer school, we want to use the term targeted summer school, right? Elementary, we're having 18 days. It starts June 1st, Monday through Thursday, 3.5 hours a day. We're looking at around a 20 to 1 student ratio. It includes all of our specialized programs, ABLE, ARISE, those types of programs will also be there. We are providing a test. There is a test, our spring iReady diagnostic test will be used as our pre-test. We are giving a post-test at the end of at the time to make sure that we can see if our students have moved forward and what kind of gains we've made in that process to see if our money has been spent wisely. We do provide transportation, breakfast, lunch, and all those things are provided as we have in the past. So it also gives us then the opportunity for students to have some meals and do some things that they may or may not have had the opportunity for, depending upon what their situation is. It is focused mostly on math, or totally on math and ELA, and it usually is split between those times, so a student can be invited for one or the other or for both in order to be in the classroom when they move through. You notice down there we talk about Jumpstart. That's the second half of summer school. Jumpstart is actually a program that exists about the last week, I believe the last week in July or right before, I think the week before school starts. And that actually is kindergartners that we bring in about a week early just to get them used to being in school. And it's a couple hours a day just to get to know the teacher, get to know what the process is, how they're going to react, and let mom have that time to keep and be with them and kind of see what kindergarten is all about to get them off to a good start. And the high schools, and again, some of these vary from time. 17 to 23 days is really about a week is all that we're talking about. Again, 20 to 1 student to teacher ratio. It includes, again, mostly ELA and math teachers. There are some additional, what we're calling credit recovery classes, where we're getting students who maybe have failed a science class or maybe need some additional time to pass a social studies class. They also have that ability to come in and do some of those things. We're tracking attendance, make sure students show up all the time. And again, how many credits do we recover? But it really focuses on two pieces. Again, it focuses not only on getting the student passing grade for this current year, but also on building the skills that are going to make them successful in the next class, the next level up. So Algebra 1, we wanted to be successful in geometry. Geometry, we wanted to be successful in Algebra 2. So they keep them there, trying to keep them there. Even though a kid may pass in the first week, we want them to come back so that we can build those skills that moving for the next class level as they move forward. There is a Bridges program, just like the kindergarten program. There's a Bridges program where we bring the schools, the eighth graders, incoming eighth graders to school about a week early. And again, that's working with teachers and working on school culture. It works on how do you find your locker? How do you get from place A, 1A to 1B? How do you get here when the bell rings? Because, of course, we've had kids in elementary schools where they walk them in lines to lunch and put them in all the places, and now they get to the high school and the bell rings and the teacher opens the door and says, see you later, and they don't know where to go and that kind of stuff. So it kind of builds those skills as it moves it forward, and so it kind of gives them that jump start to move them forward to be successful quickly in the high school. Okay? And again, our idea about all these programs is, again, intentional and focused to meet the needs of an individual student who's going to be forward and moving forward to be successful in the future. As far as numbers-wise, here's some numbers things, some statistics that you can look at. Estimated number of students, and this was as of, I think, the last Wednesday or so, when the last time I got these numbers. They may increase. We will check again after the first couple days to see if all these students show up, right? But we have about 3,800 elementary kids, 1,900 students there as we go through classified staff, and those don't include our bus drivers or our food service people who actually also work in that process. Those are actually school classified staff to help with the process. And again, estimated cost $2,150,000, and that's all paid from ESSER 3, and that is one of the designated set-asides of ESSER 3. ESSER 3 is required to spend 20% specifically on recovery for math and ELA, and so this is one of our big spending items that we're using of that to be able to spend the rest of the ESSER money in the process. We see this as not just a single step for the summer, but as we move forward, we see that this is going to actually impact us for a longer period of time, because as we talk about the idea of meeting the needs of individual kids, it means that we actually have to go through and look at how do we plan our PD, how do we plan our use of data, how do we provide that continuous improvement process that we're beginning to implement so that it doesn't just become a one-time, one-shot, all-done type of a process. So it is rolling itself into our regular daily operations so that we can continue to I hate to use the term catch the students up, but it's the idea of how do we get them to move quicker and be able to be successful in the next grade level. And I think I will have any questions, and certainly any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Board members, questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
Well, thank you for putting this together, and I'm really glad to hear that we have kind of some sort of system in place for getting our kids caught up. It's imperative, obviously, because we have slipped with COVID and the kids not being in school, obviously, so it's tough. But honestly, I'm trying to figure out too, with math, I homeschool my kid. And so we do math all year round. And the reason my daughter's so successful at math is because we do math all year round. I realize we do block scheduling, but I honestly feel it's our biggest downfall with some of these, more complicated classes like math, like algebra. My daughter's in high school, and we do talk with other kids that are going to Centennial and some of these other schools, and we're shocked. They don't know basic algebra, and they'll be like in honors algebra, which is, I guess, the equivalent of college algebra. And she's, they are not able to comprehend the basic concepts. They can't, they can't actually stack. How math normally works is you get the basic concept, and once you grasp it, then you can compound and you stack on top of it. But if you don't get one of the concepts, you can't move forward. And so what I'm trying to figure out is, how are you able to specifically pinpoint, because algebra is so broad or geometry is so broad, how do you find out for each child where they're at with, where in their algebraic issues that they're having? Is it word problems? Is it the quadratic formula? Where exactly are they not quite getting the concept? And the entire class, of course, many times they move together as a whole. The majority of the class will say, got it. Maybe there are a few kids that didn't. If they didn't get that concept, they won't get the rest of it. So is there something in place for pinpointing that specifically? Does that make sense?
Yep. And let's go back, because if I go back to this slide right here, that slide right there essentially is a statement that says, let's take the first student there, 67.9. He actually did 100% on the first standard, which may be the quadratic equation. He didn't do very well on the second standard, which may be multiplication and division of fractions. I'm just making these up as we go along. But each of those is a standard, and the teacher knows what that standard is. And so I can track, based upon his test score, what exactly he knows. And again, maybe that quadratic equation is column 4 over there, where he got 0 on that one. And what we're able to do, and this is one of our abilities with SchoolNet, is that if they put their tests in there, it's actually able to stack the test. So I can take my first test and compare it to my second test and compare it to my third test. So it'll tell you this student hasn't gotten multiplication of fractions for the last 3 tests, and I need to go back and reteach those even before it gets to the course assessment, which gives me that information in the process. So we do have things in place that work through that, and it actually is able to identify down to a standard level of this is what the kid knows or he doesn't know.
Great. I'm sorry. I guess I didn't quite understand how well it broke down, because it's the, devil's in the details, right?
Correct.
So, that definitely helps to, like I say, pinpointing with math specifically, because you can miss just one small concept and then the rest of it is, it's just gibberish to you. You won't get it, and so I think it's so important to make sure that they get it. And so do you put them in smaller groups then with kids that kind of are struggling with that same issue to try to move them all forward? Is that
correct? And that's exactly what we talked about with the summer school process. Those are those things that we ask the teacher to put them into small groups, and again, work with, and let's just use again that column 4. If I was the teacher, I would take all of those zeros and I would work for 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever I needed to, with just those 3 kids on that one concept, right, for that period of time. The others may be working on something else, right? But that's what those 3 or 4 are working with me for that specific time.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, that makes me feel a lot better, because like I said, if we don't pinpoint, we're just wasting our time, because we're teaching them stuff that they may not need. And just to clarify, we don't have Common Core, right, in the math in the schools?
We follow the state standards, whatever state standards. All of our curriculum is designed for state standards, and they identify for us the priority standards that make them successful. There's a scope and sequence that's given to us from the state that says this is what they need to do in Algebra 1 in order to be successful in geometry, in order to be successful in Algebra 2, and they stack upon each other, especially in math.
Right, but it's not I'm just asking if we got rid of Common Core with math, because Common Core, I believe, with my own personal experience with it, it's backwards, and it's very confusing to kids. It's just the more Saxon math, basic math. So I'm just trying to figure out if we actually expunged the Common Core out of the math that we're teaching the kids, or are they still getting that? Does anybody have an answer to that
Yeah,
one?
so Common Core was more of a federal approach, right? A national approach to curriculum. Arizona, I believe, many years ago, took their own approach to developing their standards. So we follow Arizona standards.
Which is not Common Core. Is that?
I don't know. I'm not, yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some elements to it, but we don't really have any discussions around Common Core math anymore. It's all
Okay.
based on Arizona standards.
Okay, as long as, for the most part, Common Core is not a part of it, because I've seen it. That's one of the reasons why we took my kid out of school. It was very backwards and confusing, and I could see why kids would just not grasp the concept. So I just want to make sure it's not really embedded in the math in particular, because it's confusing. But thank you, that's really helpful, and I think this will help our kids kind of get back on track, which is so important, and I'm glad to see that we're kind of breaking it down and getting into the details of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ms. Underhill?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moss, of course, for the presentation. I do have a couple questions. So, first of all, with the summer school and we have the diagnostic pieces. So do those instruments that we're using, iReady and Transcend, do they then prescribe for the student their next steps in that program, or how do we link the curriculum that the teachers actually are going to utilize with this data?
Okay. In some cases, the answer is yes. Transcend is a single test that the teacher then has to make arrangements to and match. iReady has two pieces to it. iReady has actually the diagnostic test that takes this test and says do this, but it also then has some work, if you will, where the student will work at their own level. So we could take them, for example, and I can say I'm helping them with the last column there, while the others are working on their algebraic thinking or whatever it is that matches with their own group. And it's a computer-based program,
Okay.
and it works through individual types of problems. It provides feedback. It tells them if they're being successful. It provides them with additional questions if they are successful, and will scale them up. It will also provide lower level questions if they miss one or if they don't get it, or it'll come back actually and tell them, be sure to go back and look at this step. We think that this is where you made the error in your program. So it's both a diagnostic process, but it's also a teaching process where they're able to progress at their own rate of speed, in other words, and meet their own needs on an individual basis.
So for the iReady program, then that's kind of how you do your progress monitoring, is that? I mean, obviously with the small groups as well. Okay.
Yes.
And then the Transcend piece, do they also have an aligned program that?
No, they do
Okay.
not. That one's just a testing program, a testing platform, actually developed by Pearson, and it is directly related to AASA. It is similar types of questions and processes that they use for the AASA test, so it's alignment and processes is what we're looking for there.
And are we have we provided professional development support to help teachers then, figure out how do we align the curriculum that we do have with the Transcend areas, and then obviously with
AASA, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very, very directly.
Okay.
We provided information on how to analyze the data and how to create your groups. We've provided data on what is the blueprint of the AASA test to kind of identify which of these is most important. For example, if we go back one slide, we know, for example, that expressions and equations is more valuable on the AASA test than geometry, right? Where should they spend their time? We provide that information to them and say, spend your time on expressions and equations and functions, as those are the two biggest parts of the AASA test on the end. So it's really become the science of teaching. What we're trying to get across with the data is the science of teaching, as the art of teaching is the relationships and getting kids to do what you want them to do and those kind of things. The science of teaching is really identifying, teach this, this is more important, how do we meet that goal, how do we move forward? And so we're really providing some professional development on that, both now but also in the future, to kind of move us forward.
No, that's great, and I mean, that's great to see that. It's good to see that for summer school, but it'd be really, really helpful as we continue. One thing I did notice just on the first chart that you gave us is that out of like, I think there's about 29 students, there's about 12 or 13 that are at either a level 1 or 2 across the board, right? So those kids, you know, in comparison with some a very, you know, a few in there that are where they're supposed to be, right, mid 3. I guess I'm just wondering, like, how are we? That's a large catch up, right? A large catch up. Are we doing anything differently to support those kids from a staffing perspective, from what we're going to do when they come back next year? I mean, it's just that's a lot of kids with a big gap.
Okay.
So
First, I would tell you, so just so we understand, the W stands for winter. So it's a measure of what happened in the winter, so it's not necessarily the end of the year.
Okay.
So they may have caught up as part of that as it goes through. The second piece is that the good part about this data is that we are able to transfer it from teacher to teacher to teacher. So when you walk in, we're able to give the teacher, for example, these are 3rd grade teachers, their 4th grade teachers will have access to all of the tests they've taken all through the year, through their 3rd grade year, and be able to move that forward, so they're actually able to identify what that student does in those times. One of your other questions, have we done things with staffing, with whatever? Yes, I can tell you in our Title I schools in particular, for example, I know that they're spending money on math specialists and on reading specialists that are able to do some pull-out programs and help some of those students as they move through. And so there's lots of different plans that are being set up by school. That's part of our continuous improvement plan that we're working with principals on for developing and moving that process forward too.
that's great. Yeah, no, I know it's like, you know, formidable challenge for certain. So that's great. So it sounds like these types of interventions that we're implementing in summer school, we anticipate kind of continuing throughout the year, and that focusing on that science of teaching piece. One thing I know that we talked a lot about over the years and that many districts have done is the response to intervention piece. And just a very cursory look at kind of research out there, it seems to be showing that response to intervention isn't necessarily the thing as far as getting our kids caught back up. So are we looking at, you know, other ways, other models of how we can, you know, just continue to meet this goal?
A lot of the training that we're doing right now is on the tiers, right? Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 instruction. How do we move that process forward? Combining it with an MTSS, which is a multi-tier system of support that takes the whole child into account and moves them forward with all the things. Obviously, they're struggling with stress and some of those things from COVID also, that we're trying to solve some of those problems with our help with some of those things with our social workers and some of our behavior interventionists to get to really, and if I really want to talk about that, is really to remove the barriers for individual student learning, right? Some students can't learn because they don't eat breakfast in the morning. Others can't learn because they have ADD. Others can't learn because of emotional concern over stress, whatever it is, homelessness, whatever it is. And we're working with that MTSS process to eliminate those things so that the teacher can be successful in that 60 to 90 minutes that's moving them forward when they get actually kids sitting in front of them ready to learn.
That's awesome, yeah, because that was just the other piece, is just that, you know, we've had so many challenges with just behaviors and discipline in the last year, and I'm really happy to hear that these pieces are, you know, folding together to try to figure that out. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Ms. Pingarelli, I was going to give you a little time to settle in, so.
Thank you.
I'm going to, if it's okay with you, I'm going to piggyback on the last thing that Ms. Underhill said. And
You're the president.
well, then you go.
It's your show.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill, for mentioning those, I guess, those considerations, right? You know, as we get into this recovery and, you know, restorative phase. But really what I want to say out of the gate is thank you to each and every one of you. I know we have some teachers here and some parents and families and students. Just great job. I know this last academic year was, you know, a little more adverse and challenging than the prior academic year, but to uplift all of our kids in a way that has, so I attended a number of 8th grade promotions and you know, high school graduations, and to uplift our kids in a way that, to Ms. Underhill's point, really serve the whole child, to use your language there, Mr. Moss. It was just unparalleled. I mean, Ms. Ari, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, we realized another record number of scholarships with our high school seniors. If I'm not mistaken, Centennial had the largest number of all of our high schools. But with that said, I mean, that was in spite of, everything that our students were going through, our teachers and staff were going through, our families, and for the district to think very globally, and more importantly, think more from a human perspective. It's just, again, just invaluable and parallel, and just so proud of everything that you have done to ensure the success of our students. That said, it is great to understand, how we move into these summer recovery restorative sessions, if you will, that also considers, the kind of what we can't see right in front of us, because what's on these screens and what's in this paperwork, it's right in front of us. It's data, but it doesn't talk about the human component, the fact that we're dealing with lives here, right? And it's pleasing to me to understand that the district continues to grow on its capacity to make sure that we're able to look beyond what's right in front of us as an organization across all levels, right? It takes a village across all levels, right? All employee groups. Without that, Mr. Moss, to your point, you're right. I mean, our children, don't learn. There is no learning that goes on if they come in to the classroom, and whether it's trauma or, hunger, whatever the factor may be. It's just, again, just proud of what you do every day to make sure that we're looking at the humanistic side of what we do as an organization. So thank you for that. That's really my comment, not a question. I was a little concerned when I was looking through this, and all I saw was data. And I was a little concerned when I first walked in, and, I didn't see anyone from, maybe Kathleen Leonard or those individuals from that team. I believe they work within your organization, Mr. Molino, so I'm assuming, no, is that right? Do I have that right? Or is that not right?
No, that's under Dr. Davidson.
Okay, so no Dr. D either. So not seeing anybody from that vertical, if you will, within our organization. I was a little concerned, but I'm pleased that they're at the table, during these conversations before we, develop the plan, and we'll continue to be at the table as we continue and further along these conversations. So thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Mrs. Pingarelli, thank you.
You're welcome. I just had a few questions. For the summer school, it's 2.1 million. And you said that we have to spend 20% of ESSER 3 funds on catching up. I think that was in the presentation. So is this the first big push towards catching up overall? And I don't know. I'm looking at you, Michelle. I'm sorry.
The specifics of the dollar amount, I'm sure Michelle can answer more directly. Is this the first big push? No, we're looking at resources. We're looking at doing new things with getting some math resources and doing some training on some of those kind of things as we go through. Is it the first big expenditure? Probably. We had planned probably in the ESSER funding, the plan, I believe we have summer school plan for this year and for next year, proving that it's going to be successful, which is why we're giving our diagnostic tests at the beginning and at the end to make sure it is successful. But I believe that there's been, and Michelle can talk probably closer about this, about how the expenditures that we've been making, the state has identified a very narrow definition of how it gets spent and what it gets spent on, and I think this is probably our biggest expenditure so far. Michelle, you can...
Well, just first of all, before we get into the finances, we also offered summer school last year as well.
Okay.
So, that really was our first big
Okay.
push. The challenges, as we have talked with the board about, is that we really felt like we were going to be in a place to make some significant some significant improvements to what we were able to, our students' performance. And as we got into the year and realized that we were still very much dealing with with the same things we were dealing with the year prior, it became even more challenging, and those gaps got even bigger. So where I would say that this is not the first push, but this is a very specific, very targeted approach, and that would be unique to this summer school versus our focus for last year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and President Sandoval, Representative Pingerelli, and to add to Dr. Reynolds' comments, this is the second year we've had the summer school activities, and both our ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 grant have been supporting those activities. Mr. Moss is correct. There is a 20% set-aside requirement with ESSER 3, and so in addition to summer school work, the purchase of eligible resources, of pending textbook adoption next year in a couple of subject matter content areas will also be part of that 20% set aside. So we're keenly aware of the requirement and we will meet it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have had comments from other parents from other school districts that have talked about their students or their kids being able to have tutoring throughout the school, and that we have not offered it. So I just wanted to see where we stand on that.
We do have after-school tutoring at most of our places through some sort of funding separately. We did look at a program that allows us to, when Dr. Bell was here, she looked at a program that allowed us to provide I got to think of what they called it, but essentially a teacher on call. If you were at home and you couldn't do your homework, you could call and get some help with that. I don't know where we ended up with that. I know she looked at it for a while, and I'm not sure that she's moved forward with that, but that is certainly one of the options that we could look at. Again, what we're really interested in is seeing how successful we're going to be, and then see what kind of adjustments we have to make in the next year or two with the ESSER funding on that.
Well, and Representative Pingerelli, thanks for that question, because that really is the transition into not just the interventions that we're providing for this summer, but how do we support all students? With a limited amount of resources, a limited amount of educators available to be able to provide this kind of summer school intervention, we fully recognize that as we transition into the new school year, just because a child's score is not in the red doesn't mean that they have a gap in their learning, if that makes sense. So a highly performing student who might have dropped a little bit and still would be in the green or still would be maybe in the yellow, they still have a gap that we have to be able to address. It's just through, in that process with some of those students, we might be able to address those gaps through Tier 1 interventions, Tier 2, or Tier 1 instruction, Tier 2 instruction. This is very much more of a kind of a Tier 3 approach. So we absolutely have to, and whether it's providing some tutoring opportunities, whether it's providing an online opportunity where students can access it, throughout the evening as they're trying to do homework, those are all strategies that we need to be looking at to support all of our students.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple other questions. So I guess after COVID, how far have we dropped? I know we talked about it at one point. I think it was maybe during your goals. We were like 2.5 years behind.
Mike, do you want to? Mr. Moss, do you want to address that?
Yeah, I would. If I had to tell you in general, we stayed above the state, so we did not drop below the state. So it was common across both. I would tell you that our gap, specifically, I'm reluctant to give a specific number in terms of what's there, but I'm going to tell you that our losses were bigger in math than in reading, specifically because of the compounding of math. Right, if a student can read, they're going to be able to read, and if they're at home, they're going to read things or whatever, even if it's on the internet or whatever it is, keep their skills up. And so our math probably lower than where we've been. If I had to give you a general idea, I would say that we are 8 to 10 percentage points lower across district-wide or grade levels, and some were higher, some were lower from where we were in passing rates in 2019. It's something that we compare against on a regular basis with principals. We always provide that data that says, here's where you were last year, here's where you were this year, right? And we kind of go along. We do have a little bit of data in on a couple of the schools. For example, I know that one of the schools in third grade in specific, because we've already gotten that data back, has increased their passing rate 24 points in 1 year in math and 20 points in reading at the same school in third grade only, and again, third grade only. Was every school that way? No, but in general, I think we improved by 4 or 5, maybe 6 district-wide. And again, that's, Dr. Reynolds talked about what we thought was going to happen last year. We would have caught up. I think we would have done better, but with all the challenges we had during the first 90 days, 120 days, made a big difference.
And we'll be bringing the board
Yeah.
that more specific information around some of those goals in
Okay.
June.
I'm just going to have an ask, just a basic, just to get a kind of an overall view, to look at the percentage of highly performing and performing plotted out against the year for like the last 5 years. And just like in English language for third grade and eighth grade math, I just kind of want to see, because for eighth grade math, I want to see where we're at in terms of performance, and that way you can anticipate how many, students are going to be going in prepared into high school math. So that's just an ask for the future. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I wrap us up?
Representative Figueroa? You good? Okay, all right. One more quick comment and maybe a question. And Dr. Reynolds, you mentioned when you were speaking that as we get into the tutoring and summer school and our limited capacity as it relates to human capital, what we talk a lot about. Our primary audience is our students without question. There's a saying that says, our teachers' work environment equates to our students' learning environment. Can you, and Ms. Pingarelli, or I'm sorry, Ms. Underhill, spoke a little bit about professional development, but can you unpack a little bit more, our supports for our teachers and staff and site leadership, as we continue along the path of adapting into this kind of new way of educating, yes, from a professional development perspective, but, even from a humanistic regard and, and other ways that we can, uplift their, build on their agency to be successful in the classroom kind of as we move forward and adapt.
Right. I would address that in a couple of different ways. First of all, I'll use some examples. Obviously, the new step that we've taken this year of use of data and going back and really being more scientific about what the data means required us to do some training with principals and work through some of those things that they could look at the data and work through that. And so we did some very specific things there. We have cluster meetings where they're quarterly or monthly meetings with principals, and I went myself to each one of those and went through all of the processes and showed them and talked about, this is what you should look for, here's a process you can go through, here's how you change from this year to that year, and help them with the teachers. The second piece is we've done this exact same thing with, and again, in their professional times, we've done some things with our instructional coaches by moving them and working, for example, not only at the Title I schools, but also being assigned to go help an individual student or individual teacher who may be struggling, a brand new teacher at one school who doesn't have an instructional coach for whatever reason. We put them, and they were able to travel from school to school and work specifically with newer teachers that were just coming into the process. And now I have some kids here, some kids not here. How do all those types of validating that process. And the third process, and I think we've done probably, I know at least 4 or 5 processes or training type of things with Dr. Leonard and with Kathleen and Dr. Walters about training for principals about how to identify stressing times with teachers. When are they stressing? How do we work with them? What kind of things? How are you empathetic? How are you listening to them and moving them forward and still maintaining a high standard, but meeting their needs emotionally and understanding where they come from in terms of what's there. I know that we've also had some principals ask for specific time to let the teachers just collaborate, and even collaboration is just sitting around, even if it's just talking about how stressed or tired or whatever it is they are, they've given them that time in that process too. So it looks like it's a whole, again, meeting the needs of all parts of what's there.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Dr. Reynolds?
And I would just add to that that we're really excited as we enter into the summer and providing some professional development opportunities, and we look to the fall, where, as Mr. Moss talked about with our PLC opportunities, really providing some supports in small group instruction, as well as how do we use technology to make our Tier 1 instruction more efficient, more effective. And so we're going to be wrapping a lot of those things. We're excited to get Dr. Teresa Hernandez, our new Chief Academic Support Officer, on board and really let her lead that work. The last thing I just wanted to say to wrap it up is how you had mentioned this a little earlier, President Sandoval, how thankful we are for our teachers, our support staff, our principals, for all the work that they did. This was an incredibly challenging year. We didn't think it could get much harder than the year prior, but it was. And we've talked for a lot of reasons why that is. But it was really challenging, and I don't even want to mention how hopeful we are. I guess I just did. But I don't want to jinx it. But we are very hopeful that as we enter into this summer, we're able to do this targeted support systems for our students, and we start working into the fall, that we're going to be able to make some significant advancements in that achievement data.
All right, no further questions, comments. We'll move on to 3.2, student substance violations.
Thank you, President Sandoval. Mr. Moss is going to be leading us through some data. We had a request from a board member to share some of this data, some of our not only data that we have as far as some incidents that have occurred over the last few years, but also some of the things that we're doing as far as prevention. Mr. Moss.
President Sandoval, members of the board, as we kind of look through this process, I really want to start the conversation again with the systems that we're trying to put in place, right? That these are systems that need to be rebuilt and systems we're going to work with as we kind of go forward. And so as we move through the presentation, obviously this is part of our safe and welcoming schools, but it's also a big part of student achievement, right? How do we keep kids in school? How do we make sure that they're there? How do we focus them on an academic learning and some of those kind of things? And so it really meets our strategic plan and one of our processes and a couple of our processes we're moving forward. The second slide here tells us about what's in our policy, what actually is our policy, and I use this because the definitions are there in terms of what we consider to be drug use and moving us through what's there. And you can see alcoholic beverages and hallucinogenic substances, inhalants, and that kind of stuff. And it also matches with some of our breakdowns of categories. So when you talk about what the categories are, you can kind of put them in these places because that's what's required. And we do some reporting to the federal government, and this is some of the categories that we have to use. So it's a specific about what's in the policy and how we get there. We have what's called a Safe Schools report that kind of gives us some information that we have to turn into the federal government on how our schools are being operated. The third part here is our discipline process, and this is what's in our student teacher handbook, and all students again are required to read it and sign it and do some of those things. The parents are the same way. We get it back from them and we kind of talk about these things. In most cases, there are multiple steps in this process. An example, the student who is in possession, for example, possession of marijuana, for example, would probably not just get one of those things, but we certainly would have a conversation with parents. We'd certainly have a notification to the police. We would certainly have some sort of suspension, either short-term or long-term. So it's not just one thing that we would go to. We would probably do more than that. And the second piece of this, and I think that in all my years when I was working in the high schools, one of the things was there was a significant difference between the first one, possession of drugs, and the distribution of drugs. The distribution of drugs was a much bigger issue, and we dealt with it in a much more, I want to say, taking into account the safety of the school much more than the individual pieces of the student, right? And so we move those things, and you can see that those are there. Usually those result in longer-term suspensions and other places that we work with the parents in terms of what's there. Disciplining in drug use is always a balance, right? And there's the balance between the educational needs of the student, the safety of the school in terms of what kind of safety precautions we have and how do we make kids want to be there. And the third piece then is the legal system and what is our requirements to report. And in our high schools in particular where we have SROs, that's one of them made it very simple for us now. The SRO is notified almost immediately if there's any kind of drug process and anything takes place. And so it's a much quicker reaction time for what's there. And again, keeping that balance is what we always strive for. You know, we hear schools say we have zero tolerance, kids are out for 10 days no matter what. Certainly has a big impact in our block scheduling on students' ability to learn and get caught up and move forward. And so we're balancing that act of education with school safety and individual student needs. The next slide has some data. This is for elementary schools, last 4 years. I will caution you to take a look at 19 and 20 and 20 and 21 a little bit skeptically, right? I mean, 19 and 20, for example, we didn't go to school for the last quarter, right? Everyone was online, so there was only about 3/4 of the year where we were actually there. The 2021 year, we had probably 8,000 to 10,000 students who were online the whole time. So there was less opportunity with less students on campus and some of those kind of things. So you can kind of look through there and see what's being used and where the process is. The 21-22 data has not been compiled yet because our Safe School report is not due until I think mid-July, somewhere in there. So we'll work with the process so we can again bring back information if that's necessary. We can bring back some other information for you. These are the high school numbers. And probably when I talk with the high school administrators and with Ms. Lopez Lira about this, she said the biggest issue that they're having with the drugs at the current time is the vaping and the ability of the students to vape. And here's the issue that really has come back. In the past, if marijuana was used on campus, it would smell, it would be able, everybody can identify what's there, right? Now with the vaping processes and the pens have gotten to be so good, you can't smell it, you can't tell the difference between a vape pen that has tobacco in it and a vape pen that has marijuana in it. It takes probably two months or so to go get tested and bring it back to you. So the bottom line says you look at it, you see the student, you work through that, and you go along there. Probably the second biggest issue that they're having with the marijuana usage or whatever is on campus is the different forms. I know that there was a recent training for our administrators from one of the SROs at Centennial who put a picture of all the different types of marijuana now that were all available that you should look for with students. For example, and the vaping pen was there, the regular marijuana was there, the gummies were there, the chips. Now we have chips that are coated with the, look like potato chips that are coated with TLC as they put them in there and they go through that. And so they did some training with the schools in terms of what to look for, how to look for, what kind of reactions you're going to get, and it kind of goes along. And so those are probably the keys that we're working on. Is the proliferation is really about different types of, I'll use delivery systems, if you will, with the worst connotation in mind there. In terms of prevention, when I talk with all of the high school people, they said the most important prevention is to get the parents involved in the process. That's where the problem can be solved and taken care of. There is some training, and we've done some things with parents in terms of parenting classes, in terms of the not my kid types of processes where we're having some things where we're talking with parents and teaching them what they should be looking for. If your kid always carries around $200 or $300 in cash, maybe you should ask some questions about what's there, right? some of those kind of things in terms of what they should be looking for. Positive school culture is the second one, and I know that they work at the schools about the idea of creating a culture where they talk to the students about really self-policing, right? About self-policing of your own campus. What's your school like? What's the reputation of your school? How does it work, and how do you get that? And I can tell you, there's no students in here that I ever worked with, but when I would get a tip about someone having marijuana or drugs or whatever on campus, I can tell you 95% of the time it came from another student. And they would walk by and say, hey, maybe you should have a conversation with so-and-so, right? And so those were some of the things as you go through. The mental health professionals has really helped us, they say at the schools, has really helped us in the process. Normally the students that are involved in this have potentially other issues that are there. They have trauma at home, they have depression, they have whatever it is, and the social workers are able to step in and kind of help with those processes and take them and wean them off of some of these the drugs that they use to, the escape piece, if you wish, right, in terms of what's there. There is some drug training kind of processes built into our health classes. It's not required, but it is in our health classes. We've talked about putting it in PE over time to give us at least some statement where we're talking about the impact of drugs on students and the body and some of those kind of things as part of the process in terms of what's there. Okay. As far as intervention, we have lots of systems there. Again, parenting classes and parent involvement is by far the biggest one. Our school resource officers are probably the second biggest, and again, just their presence, right, at the schools is a deterrent. They again have done some trainings for us in terms of what to look for, how do we move these things forward. We've made some community partnerships. There's a group called the Family Intervention Center that will really not just deal with drugs, but deal really with any issues that families may have. If it's homelessness, if it's food, if it's clothing, if it's drug addiction, if it's trauma, whatever it is, that we make referrals from our social workers, behavior interventionists, those people that are able to work together. And again, we hope that the district, that the discipline makers become some sort of deterrent, right? But at the same time, we have to balance that view of how do we make sure the student is successful educationally at the same time of not bringing or not having drugs on campus. Okay, so we'll move to the last piece here, and I will stand for any questions that you may have about this process.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
Yes, actually, I even have a handout. You actually mentioned that there are different types of forms of drugs, and in particular, I guess I was going to kind of highlight the marijuana usage. And my concern is not only for the elementary school, but also for the high school level, obviously, but the cannabis candies, because we obviously had our Proposition 207 that was passed in November of 2020, and since then, there's been a huge surge in obviously drug use, but marijuana use in particular. And the cannabis candies, as you can see from just the picture, and maybe you've seen these and maybe you haven't, but they look very appetizing. That's like candy I would eat, and I like candy. So it's concerning to me on the level with the elementary school kids that I appreciate the fact that you did mention that we are talking with parents. I think they have to be in the loop about this, but I was hoping there might be an opportunity for us to, give parents just a little bit more information, because I get the impression just from talking to people that they are not aware that candy that looks like this is actually completely tainted with marijuana. And it looks very appetizing, and especially to kids who might just come to school with it, and they may not even know what they have. They could have gotten it from home, I don't know, or from someone else, and they're just sharing. Kids share stuff, especially the lower levels. I just wonder if there's a way that we might be able to, inform the parents a little bit more. Maybe give them an email at the beginning of the school, give them pictures, just show them what it looks like, to be aware. And if there's any way that we might be able to encourage kids not to accept candy, food, brownies, obviously brownies, but they've kind of morphed into whole this now. But that they don't share it. And if anyone, even a friend of theirs, offers it to them, some sort of candy or something, that we encourage them to not accept it, and that we try to make that more of a rule of thumb in the elementary school. So I'm not sure if we've actually gone that route or actually spoken specifically about, hey, we know you're not supposed to take candy from strangers, but don't take it from your friends, don't take it from other people. There's no way when it's out of the package you're going to know what you're eating. There's no way. And so I was wondering about that, if there's some way that we might be able to, like I say, give the parents a little bit more information, because this is kind of new territory now, since, it's only been 2 years, but a lot has happened in that time frame for the state of Arizona and the distribution of it, just to make sure we keep our kids safe and, not passing around, cannabis in school.
We can absolutely look at how we can do even a better job communicating with our parents. A lot of these programs are opt-in for parents, and of course, then that poses some issues. But how can we do a better job on our outreach with parents? Unfortunately, we have had to add this element to our discussions with students, and those discussions sometimes have to happen at a younger and younger age, because a student looking at this at a very young age wouldn't understand what he or she was looking at. So that has become part of our communication with students as well.
And I think this obviously is going on in the high school level as well, but, and I don't know if we could kind of utilize the same thing and just inform the students, just kind of a precautionary, hey, don't take food, or candy or what have you. You don't know where it came from, basically, or what's in it, what's laced with. And the vaping issue, like you said, is a really big issue too, that has really kind of taken an upturn. And is there something specific that we're doing to try to curb the vaping? I know you talked about it a little bit, but is there something very specific? Are we talking to the kids in any way in a little bit more, direct fashion? I remember when I was like in 6th grade, they had almost like a Scared Straight video that we had to watch. It was kind of crazy, but but it kind of freaked you out a little bit. But I don't know what we do nowadays to kind of, almost, scare them just a little bit, just enough to say, hey, don't do this, make good choices,
Our high schools work hard at communicating with their students to make good choices. But it is, and they've absolutely, you can ask any high school principal, high school assistant principal, high school parent, about the issues of vaping and how pervasive it is, has become and continues to be. So they're well aware of and deal with this on a regular basis, and are working hard to communicate with students on how important it is that they not take items that they don't know where those came from, even if it's from your closest friend. And that has become part of our process from middle school all the way through high school.
Well, that's good. I'm very good. I'm glad to hear that. And I honestly think, and this is just my personal perspective, that I think a lot of times the reason the kids get into drugs, that they maybe dress inappropriately, all kinds of, the same, to me, it's kind of the same level. They don't have respect for their own self and their own bodies. And I know it's not necessarily our responsibility to try to get them there, but maybe we could help them along, because I think the foundation of what's going on has nothing to do with the drugs. It has to do with the fact that they don't have respect for their own self. It's deeper, right? And so how do we get there? How do we get to those kids, and how do we reach them to make them realize that they're worth something and that this is not going to give them any worth? So, it's just important to me, and I just have heard stories, and I still keep hearing that this keeps coming up, and the candy in particular is just really alarming and scary to me, because like I say, I can see it's easily getting into the elementary level with kids that, end up with something that they don't know what they have, and they're sharing it with their friends because it's nice to share. you know, then all of a sudden you've got this big problem. So, you know, I just want to see that we make sure that we keep on top of it and keep the parents involved and try to give our kids at all levels a sense of respect for themselves and self-worth. And then if they have that, you know, they won't willingly go for this stuff, you know, so however we can get there. I know it's a big problem, but, you know.
No, it's an important topic and one that we will continue to make a priority for sure. Thank you for bringing it to us.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Questions, comments? Ms. Pingerelli?
Thank you. I just wanted to, I didn't get the number of students that we had online for 20 and 21.
Off the top of my head, again, I can tell you the exact number. I can get the exact number for you, but I would say around 8,000,
Okay,
8 to 10,000, I would say.
okay. And then could you tell me the difference for the high school data chart, say for marijuana category, the difference in an in-school suspension, off-campus suspension, and other discipline?
An in-school suspension, the student comes to school and there's a room that they have to sit in and they are able to do their work, and they are essentially sequestered in a separate room with a teacher supervising in terms of what's there. An off-campus suspension, the student is not allowed to come to school and they stay home. The teacher sends homework and they do some of those kind of things. That's the one piece. The other discipline, probably, I'm not sure exactly what those would be, but I would say those may have been a parental call. It may have been taking the stuff away. It may have been loss of a privilege. It may have been something like that. That's not a suspension where they're not put in a separate timeout area or whatever it is.
Okay. And then I know we kind of skipped over a little bit for prevention, discipline models, restorative practices. So are we getting, so restorative practices, you're trying to keep the kids in school more. Or I guess I'm old school and I believe in zero tolerance. So are we going more towards the opposite of zero tolerance?
Well, I think when we talk about restorative practices in the area of, really in the area of all student discipline, it is adding in prevention strategies to try to change the behavior. So it doesn't replace necessarily the student matrix consequence. It just adds another layer. For instance, what are some of the drug counseling opportunities that are out there? So if we have a student who is in possession of drugs, there would be an off-campus, most likely some sort of an off-campus discipline. But what else can we add to that to make it more of an educational opportunity so we get that child help and we change that behavior versus just simply sending them home?
Okay. I'm still more towards zero tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Pingerelli. Ms. Underhill?
Well, I just wanted to speak, like, as a high school parent, I feel like the programs that we have had our SROs provide, and not just SROs, but other members of our, police partnerships within the cities have been really helpful and successful. And they have actually come in and shown us lots and lots of pictures of different things that are out there and different things that are happening. So I do think that those partnerships are really critical. I think the other piece, and we've really talked about this with all of our kind of social emotional support pieces, just those kids having trusted adults at their school, because I know that the kids don't only just get it directly when we're talking about drugs, but they get it from their coaches, right? They get it from people that they interact with on a different level that are telling them, you got to take care of yourself, right? You got to take care of your body, your mind, all those things. So I think that my kids have benefited from, that kind of attitude through all the different adults that they've come into contact with. So I guess from my standpoint, I just think those partnerships that we have in place are really, really helpful, both from a prevention and an intervention piece. And I also think that a lot of times kids that are involved in drugs have challenges at home. So I think sending them home to a place where they are likely to have little supervision anyway is not necessarily, reformative or helpful in any way. So I do think that moving towards some of those restorative practices is helpful, especially for those kids that we might be able to have opportunity to bring back and bring out of those types of behaviors. So generally, I feel like that a lot of what we're doing, unfortunately, some stuff doesn't get as attended as well as it could. And so maybe we just need to continue to reach out and provide more opportunities like that. But generally, I think we do a pretty good job. So.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Underhill. Yeah, I look, there's no doubt there are certain misses, infractions, if you will, that warrant, off-site suspension. I think for me, and I've said it before, from a restorative perspective, I think this is an area that I believe we're moving in the right direction. But I think we can be better as it relates to keeping kids in school, right? There are just so many challenges and environments that our students go through that unless we have those strong relationships, whether it's with a teacher or a coach or crossing guard, whatever, we don't know what those are. And keeping kids in school, and whether it's, if there's a number of individuals who have, we're vaping, and having groups on site. I think some of these partnerships are great, but how do we keep them in school, put them through mandated groups, on site, and continue the learning process while we're educating them on the negative impact on the reason why they're in this group, right? So again, for me, it's when I take a look at some of the data that we have out there that shows different sites who have a lot more off-site suspensions than others, at times it feels like it becomes just a way to address the issue. Just, just send them home, right? And they're probably going to continue vaping and playing Call of Duty while they're at home. But, what can we do to change the behavior so when they come back, there is a difference, and they are educated. And, that's why we're here, so that when they leave our walls, they're in a place that they can be successful and be just adaptable and confident citizens of society. So anyway, it's, Ms. Hill, I do appreciate you bringing this forth. And there's no doubt. I'm a big gummy worm guy, so these all look great. But it's just there is a lot of different ways out there that these particular substances, if you will, can get inside of our young scholars, and being proactive is important. So thank you again for bringing this forth. All right, no further questions, comments? Dr. Rose, were you going to say something? Or you just, okay.
Ready to address 3.3.
All right, moving on to 3.3, school repurposing update.
Thank you again, President Sandoval, Governing Board. We've got an update on the repurposing work that we've done. If you remember, we have met several times through study sessions to discuss this process and to get some feedback and guidance from the Governing Board. We are here again with the work that Mr. Molino took over back in October and has done a wonderful job working with the team to get some of the answers addressed. Our goal tonight is to provide you with an update where we are and what our plans are to move forward. Mr. Molino.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds. President Sandoval, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Reynolds, Cabinet, and guests. Tonight, administration is prepared to bring forward a recommendation and timeline for the closure and/or repurposing of the 3 candidate schools. The most common question that we have received in the last 5 months from both parents and staff is why? Why is the school district considering closing schools? This question, it's important that staff and parents know the details and the steps in regards to the decision-making process that the school district has followed for the last 2.5 to 3 years. Closing a school and or repurposing the school site is directly aligned with our stewardship of resources perspective of the strategic plan. Just the fact that we are considering this and having discussions about this shows our community that we are holding ourselves accountable and fiscally responsible. Whatever the outcome, whichever direction the Governing Board gives administration, we can tell our community that we have done our due diligence, we have made a data-driven decision, and have followed the process in a transparent way. This is a difficult decision with a long-lasting impact on both our communities and our school district. We know it is a passionate topic, and we have walked through it with compassion, transparency, and understanding while listening and having difficult conversations with both staff and parents. During the last 3 school years, we have analyzed over 13 data sets and trends. Some of the key ones are analyzing the declining enrollment in Southeast region. We refer to this as Area 2, which is north of Grand and south of Bell. And, analyzing our forecasted enrollment for the next 10 years, and Mr. Moss and his team have contracted 2 different demographic companies, and both their data sets over the last 2 or 3 years is aligned in the results that we're getting. Our school capacity utilization regarding the number of empty seats that we have in the school district, and using the ADM facility assessment data that we got in 2020 to guide us in regards to our facility essential and critical needs. And then lastly, viewing our operational costs, which for low utilization schools has a high per student cost. And just this week, on May 18th, Ms. Myers and her team, we did another budget analysis. And using the current enrollment and the ADM generated by these 3 schools this fiscal year, there are 2 of the 3 schools, their expenses were higher than the generated ADM funding that they brought in. Going back to September 2019, the school district contracted the ADM group and Think Smart Planning to do 2 assessments. The first one, a facility assessments for our sites and buildings. This assessment gave us the roadmap for deficiencies in our buildings and for repairs and critical and essential needs projects, things such as roofing, weatherization, pavement, HVAC, electrical and plumbing are just some of the areas. And then a capacity and utilization study, which analyzed the student enrollment capacity and utilization. Capacity refers to the number of seats or students the school may reasonably accommodate, and then utilization, how we're using the building in regards to enrollment, whether it's highly utilized like Liberty High School is right now, or low utilization. Based on these 2 assessments, Superintendent Linda Pallas-Thompson called for a facility and master planning committee to further analyze the data. This happened around January 2020 to February 2020. The Facility Master Plan Committee started even during the pandemic. They started meet and continue to meet, and then made a recommendation to the superintendent in exactly about 1 year ago, of May of 2021. And there were 3 schools classified as being candidates for being closed and or repurposed. And these 3 schools were Desert Palms, Pioneer, and Skyview. The Facility Master Plan Committee gave the governing board the superintendent's recommendation in August of 2021. And at that time, under the superintendent's recommendation and guidance, the school repurposing team was formed. The school repurposing team met throughout the spring of 2022 and gave a recommendation that if the schools were to be repurposed instead, other than just closed, what would the buildings be used for? And we'll cover the 3 recommendations from the team here in a little bit. Summarizing the process that the school district has gone through over the last 3 years. First phase, we can break it down into 5 phases. The first phase, we collected and analyzed the data, and that's when the Facility Master Planning Committee was formed. Second phase was this fiscal year, and the school repurposing team seeing what are the options of what could the sites or the buildings be repurposed into. And then phase 3, which we're currently in right now. And this is bringing forward the recommendation and to receive feedback from the governing board whether we should move forward into phase 4. And then we're going to cover the details of phases 4 and 5 later on in the presentation. There are 4 possible options if the governing board decides to move forward with closing a school. One option that we have not listed is closing the school, putting plywood on the windows and doors and chain link fence around it and leaving the site empty. That is not something that we're considering as an option. It is something that has been done throughout the nation in some cities and even here in Arizona. But for us, we don't believe that's a viable option for our communities and district. The three options we are considering are selling the land, repurposing the land, and trading the land. With trading the land, administration would seek feedback to actively engage land developers with the possibility of finding a developer that would be interested in trading 1, 2, or 3 of the parcels of land in order to trade for approximately 50 acres of land in the northern region of the district, which is Area 4, where we really need a high school in regards to space. The approximate cost for 50 acres of land right now in today's market for undeveloped land is $15 million. This option would avoid the cost of performing the facility maintenance, upgrade, and repair costs. And based off the 2020 ADM assessment for these three schools, that is roughly $19.2 million. With inflation, we're looking at over $21 million for the facility repairs and upkeeps.
Mr. Merlino, I apologize. What was the 15 million tied to?
The 15 million is the approximate cost of 50 acres of undeveloped land.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, can you give the 19, the last number?
19.2?
Yes.
19.2 million is the 2020 ADM critical and essential needs repairs and maintenance upgrades for the three sites. With inflation, that number, and inflation in Arizona right now is between 10 to 11% per year. That number's over $21 million. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have an estimate on the value of the three properties? I mean, would it be close to the 15 million?
We have not done an appraisal of the properties. We do not want to get too far ahead of the governing board in contracting an appraisal. So in regards to the value, we can get you the information of what the Maricopa County Assessor site says the sites are. I have that information. I can get it to you later tonight or for the Friday report, but we have not done a formal appraisal of the land. We do not want to get ahead of the governing board going that far.
And in addition to that, I guess, response or report, Ms. Myers, I mean, if we can also understand, I mean, the sale of land, kind of where those monies would drop into as far as what bucket and how they can be used, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
At the minimum for the savings in the M&O budget for these three school sites in regards to salaries, utilities, and maintenance and upkeep on a yearly basis, we're looking at approximately $2 million. It's a little higher than that, but in regards to not certified staff, but relocating the staff and just collapsing the three schools and what we would save in regards to utilities and M&O. Based on the question of why close a school that we proposed earlier that the staff and parents keep asking, trading the land is the most fiscally responsible option. The school repurposing team recommends that if the sites were to be repurposed, the following three options would be the highest needs for the school district. And before I get to the three recommendations, we have a need for space in the district. We have not just in the north for elementary and high school sites, but for educational programs and operational departments, we have a true need of space in the district. So, and these are just three of the highest. Technology, community staff train center, traditional school, or an alternative education center. With all three of these options, the facilities maintenance and repair costs outlined in the ADM report of 2020 would not be avoided. So we would still have to do those $21 million in upgrades and maintenance costs. These three options for repurposing can be viewed in a hybrid approach, as in some of these can be done on the same site concurrently. And then some of these can also be housed in one of the three existing schools with the school staying open, and we'll just be utilizing the space better, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry, could you clarify for me, what is an alternative education center? Exactly.
I'll cover that here. We'll get to that.
All right.
For the Technology and Staff Training Center, the main objective of this site would be to provide the space for relocation of the e-campus school, which is currently using classroom spaces at Peoria High School. So it would be relocating the online school, the teachers, and giving them more space to grow. Right now we have several teachers sharing one classroom, and as we learned throughout the last 2 years through the pandemic, being online with somebody else in the same room, you get the audio feedback, so it would be just giving the teachers in the program more space to grow. We will also create several teaching studio spaces for multiple content areas, so they can be used during professional development with teachers and staff. And then the rest of the space would be used for the listed programs, which are creating a family resource center, a welcome center, and relocating the copy center relocation. With all the new textbook adoptions that the district is considering in the next 1 or 2 school years, creating a curriculum resource warehouse to store all the manipulatives. Another option for the repurposing of the buildings would be creating a new traditional school by expanding the successful and popular model of our current Peoria traditional school. The school repurposing team proposed that centralizing all our gifted services in this one location, and then the possibility of creating an observation school with a partnership with the higher education on this site. And this would help us build our own workforce and bringing in our new teacher hiring pool. This option would require all essential and critical needs facility repair costs, but it would also give us a perception factor with the community that we are closing a school to build another school in the same exact location. So that perception, how the community would take that. And the last option, the Alternative Education Center, this would be the most expensive option of the 3 for repurposing. The main benefits of this option are providing the needed services for students in a centralized manner in one site. And if this site were made into an emotional disability private day school, we would have cost savings by bringing back possible cost savings by bringing back tuition out students. And this would be a school kind of like ACES. Along with the facility and maintenance and repair costs not being avoided, we will also have the cost to upgrade the program to meet the needs of a special needs school. In looking at the staffing model for this site with special education, we estimate that salaries and benefits costs would be approximately $5.8 to $6.5 million per year, depending on the 1 to 7 years experience of the staff. One concern or threat for this is that the current workforce market, special ed teachers are high in demand and it's hard to find them, whether we would even be able to hire enough special education teachers to create a site like this. If we were in the same site to use the space fully, create an alternative elementary school, the approximate cost in M&O for the elementary portion would be between $1.6 to $1.8 million. So both sites combined, the private day school and an alternative elementary school in the same site, we would be looking between $7.5 to $8 million in M&O.
Annually?
Annually. And that's with benefits. The third option is selling the land. This final option is to consider selling 1, 2, or 3 of the parcels of lands. There are Arizona revised statutes that we would have to follow. If the governing board decides or gives administration feedback and direction that this is an option that they would consider, we would recommend placing this on the November 2023 ballot. It would require voter approval before we could sell the land.
So before we talk a little bit about what we're recommending as we move forward, I just want to give the board an opportunity to ask any questions up to this time. Our next piece is to share with you what our plan is to move forward from now until the fall. But I want to give you an opportunity if you have any questions right now for Mr. Molino.
Sure. Ms. Hill?
Yes, I do. Okay, so I guess I'm just trying to digest all of this information. And as far as, obviously, you said fiscally the best option is to trade the land, and I guess I would like to know why that would be as opposed to, we'll say, selling it. The market's really good right now, even for just for land. So, and if we don't know about what's happening with the aggregate expenditure, I'm assuming that could help us financially then too. So I'm just wondering why the recommendation for trade the land is the best option you believe as opposed to just selling it.
You want to,
Sandoval, Mrs. Hill.
you want me to take it?
Whoever knows the answer.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, in order to sell the land, we have to get that voter approved, so there's a cost. As far as going out for an election, we don't know whether our voters would approve that. There's also a piece where, as we go to sell the land, we don't have control, there's limited control over who we can sell that property to. Whereas when we trade the land, we have a little bit more control over adding value to the community as we talk about partners and developers and what that property might turn into versus just kind of losing that control. And I'm going to look to Ms. Myers and make sure I'm saying this right, where basically it comes down to just whoever offers the most money, we sell it to. So we really lose a lot of control when it comes to how we work with the community to make sure that we're enhancing that neighborhood.
Okay, so this is really different than like selling a house. So you don't get to pick your buyer, is that it? Okay, so we lose control of, okay. I guess I didn't understand that portion. That makes a big difference, you know, because I think we'd want to have some control of that. Yes, but if we trade the land, does that also still go up for an election for the voters to approve that as well, or is that just something?
No, there's no requirement to go out for voter approval if we do a land swap.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And just as a side note, and I'm going to again look to Ms. Myers, although we're all learning as we walk through this process. It's not as if we would be able to trade the land for $1, right? We have to get equal amounts of value for that. And I use that was a bad comparison, but if our land is valued at $10 million, we can't trade it for land that's worth $10,000.
Okay, so that's complicated too. And then I guess my last question is, since we have 3 properties we're looking at, is it possible to trade one and then, you know, do something different with each one? Because wouldn't it be complicated to find, you know, a business partner basically that we can make a trade with 3 different properties? So can we look at each one individually then? Is that possible?
Yes, we will be looking at each one individually.
Okay.
And as we make recommendations to the board, right, each one of those sites is dealt with individually. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Representative Pingrell? Okay. Just a quick question, and this may be for you, Ms. Myers. The land swap, now, well, I'll start with this. We currently have land that's been gifted to us by developers in the areas where we need high schools and/or elementary schools, correct?
President Sandoval, members of the governing board, we have parcels that are restricted for elementary school construction. We have not received a donation for a developer with a high school parcel, and typically developers don't donate parcels for high schools to districts. It's something that school districts purchase, or depending on their growth and qualifications with the school facilities board, there may be some funding through the SFB.
Gotcha. Perfect. No, thank you for that. And where I'm headed is, you know, from a land swap perspective, if elementary school, so we have some parcels available to us, is it a possibility that the land swap is a developer takes the land, and I'm making this up, and let's say it's 15 million that we get as a district for that swap, if you will, can that 15 million go towards building an elementary school?
You're describing a hybrid swap sale, because I believe what you're describing is we would be receiving cash proceeds. And I will provide in a Friday report the summary information under statute of opportunities and restrictions when it comes to the proceeds from a property sale, if approved by the voters. But typically with a land swap, meaning the actual land and any structures on that property, it's like a exchange transaction, meaning the value has to be similar. Arizona Constitution prohibits us from having a gift of public funds, so you would have to have a like exchange of equal value if we were to trade one of our properties and the buildings on that property. And then, of course, for someone who would be interested in that swap, there's the zoning considerations that would have to be looked at with the respective city and things of that nature.
So we'll look for more information when that report comes out, or hybrid is possible, or no?
No, it's not. I was
Okay,
saying you were kind
got
of
it.
describing a hybrid. There is binary.
Got it. I got you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Underhill?
Yeah, so this is just kind of a who knows question, but if, say, you do the land swap and you get the land for the high school, but we are unable to get the funding to build the high school, what do we do with it, like, in the meantime? Or, how, we're responsible, obviously, for upkeep, et cetera, but how do we address that situation?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, normally for parcels of land that we have undeveloped, we'll put a fence around it to prevent dumping, which we have experienced, and then we will maintain that land until we can. And then in the future, if we are not able to build a school, which I think based off our needs, we're going to have to, at that point, the governing board at that point can look at either trading that land or selling it.
Thank you, Mr. Molino. If I just may add, with elementary parcels in particular, oftentimes there's a build timeline built into the donation, and if a district does not build within so many years, then that donation reverts back to the developer as well.
Sorry, just to clarify, so on this would be a different scenario, so it wouldn't revert back to, okay, this would be ours. Okay, thank you.
Were you going to say something, Dr. Arnold? Nope. So, you said it earlier, Mr. Molino, this is and we've said it all along, this is a very emotional task, sorry. When we take a look at the products and services, well, let me take a quick step back. I've always said every site has a story, right? And, in other words, every site has, different needs that, again, I'm proud of being a part of a district that is very intentional about making sure that we, integrate those needs into the sites to ensure student success. Who's at the table as we're making these decisions moving forward? I'm sure everybody in this team is. I'm going to assume resident experts, whether it be architects, developers, et cetera, just making sure that we're thinking of everything, but also from a community perspective, and again, even our team with Kathleen Leonard and Dr. Walters, and understanding the resources that we currently provide one of those sites, and just because I see a Skyview sign there, I'm going to say Skyview, for instance, as an example, ensuring that if, it's Skyview is impacted, ensuring that we make sure that those students will continue to be served in a way that they currently are, and better, right? I think as we take a look at repurposing, our hope would be to build something that's great and that's deserving of all of our communities, and certainly that community. And how do we ensure that, our students, how does all that transfer and make sure that we're having the same social workers and behavior interventionists and et cetera, at that site to, if it becomes a site of multiple communities, I guess, right? If that happens, making sure that all of those students, are served in a way that they deserve. So I guess that's my question, making sure that that transfer of products and services happens very fluidly. So any of the students who are impacted, by this potential change, don't lose, that momentum.
That's a great question. And so I think if you could either move forward to where you have, thank you. So as we look at our phases, what you're describing is phase 4. We're currently in we're entering into phase 3 right now. So as we bring recommendations to the governing board, and we enter into those public forums and hearings where we do the study, the whole process on what that transition would look like, that's when we would be bringing, because that's when the board would need to be making decisions on whether or not to close, and whether or not to sell, trade, repurpose. And so that process would be taking place in the fall. And we would want to be, as we make those decisions, we would be bringing stakeholders from the variety of communities together to talk about what that plan would look like. It's a little chicken and the egg. I think we talked about this the last time we met. It's hard to really invest all the time and energy and resources that it takes to figure out what those properties are going to potentially turn into when we haven't made the decision yet on whether or not we're going to close those facilities. But they do have to correspond. They do have to go hand in hand, so that the board made it very clear that you wanted to hear more specific options prior to entering into phase 4.
Got it. Thank you. Representative Pingerelli?
Yes. So, Ms. Myers, the land that we have for the elementary school, I know that was maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Do you know how long we have to build on that?
Well, thank you, President Sandoval, Representative Pingerelli. We currently have 3 elementary school sites that have been accepted as donations by the district. And there's a 4th potential donation in North Point that it will most likely come to fruition, but the 3 are the Meadows, Rancho Cabrillo, and Mystic. I believe you're referring to the Meadows, where January of 2019, when there was an amendment to the donation agreement that the governing board approved, there was a 10-year clock that started ticking. There was language within the donation agreement that if the district did not start construction with an elementary school within 10 years, that the developer could ask for that reversion. Now, of course, there could always be a discussion to amend that agreement again, but right now, the way it's written and the way it was originally presented many years ago, it had that timeline.
Okay, so now we're down to about 7 years.
Approximately.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess the thing is, I know you talked about the keeping control of the land and doing a kind of an equal swap. So I guess the reason we want to do that is because we don't want a charter school coming in and taking the students that are there.
Well, we don't necessarily have control over who purchases that land, right? It could be, it goes to whoever offers the most dollars.
Right.
So we don't know who that would be. Certainly, if a charter school purchased that property, that can create issues for us as well in the loss of ADM. That's something we absolutely would need to consider.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Pingerelli. Any further questions, comments? Nope.
So, if you, well, you don't need to back that up. So not our recommendation, what we're planning on doing is to continue to, we know we have the three options that we're continuing to explore. We are this summer going to move forward in some more I guess, some additional talks or advanced talks regarding land swap. We haven't done a lot of work around that topic, but as we have explored different options, it's time now to invest some energy into figuring out what next steps would be with a land swap, so that that we have that as a viable option, if in fact it is a viable option, that we have that as a viable option for the board, so that you can make a much clearer decision on what we do as we enter into the fall.
Okay. I know we have a few more slides, or do we talk about those?
We kind of hit most of
No,
most
we
of the
kinda
next
hit
steps.
most of it. Just to clarify, entering into phase 4, we would create it, probably the first thing that we would do in August, create an attendance boundary committee, and then that committee would start meeting August, September, October. During that process of boundary changes, there would be public hearings also. And then the earliest and probably fastest that we could move as an administration in doing this would be possibly at the fastest coming back to the governing board for an action item in November of 2022.
And let me just jump in quickly, that the work that we do around boundary change, as I said, all of these things have to happen at the same time. And so whether or not the governing board chooses to close 1, 2, 3, or no schools, that definitely impacts the work that we do with the boundary. So we have to make those decisions prior to bringing to the board any decisions on what recommended changes. Now it is time in our process. It's not work that would go to waste, because we have some issues, not just in the areas that we're talking about, these 3 communities, but we also have to look at some of our concerns in the northern area, as well as some of our other southern attendance areas where we need to potentially clean those up. So that work will all be going on at the same time.
And I think that covers it all.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'll say this. It's, this is a heavy lift, for sure. And, but I do appreciate everybody being, again, intentional about focusing on our students, meaning, the best way to leverage what we may have to do with regards to this land, all in the spirit of student success and serving our students in the way that they deserve. Yeah, all I can ask for, which, I think we, continue to ask for, is, as we go through this process, I know there's, ARS guidance, with regard to, when we need to get notifications out, et cetera. But ensuring that, when we look at our table and the seats around the table, that it is very inclusive across not only, the relevant employee groups, but also the community, and making sure that they have a voice at this table as well.
No, I'd appreciate that. And if I could just finish up this conversation around, as we talk about property value, and we talk about community resources, and we talk about all of these different things, it is absolutely important that we remember that these are schools. And right now that they are families and they are communities supporting the children in those communities. And so at times it may feel like there's a disconnect between, as we're talking about the value of this property or the value of this parcel, or those types of things. But it is a heavy lift, and it is a very challenging thing to walk through. But I just want to make sure that we remind ourselves, we remind our entire community that that these are people, these are students, these are teachers and administrators and parents and community members who have grown to love these schools and rely on them. So that's an important piece as well, and I don't want that to be lost as we talk about dollars and cents and seats.
Yeah, thank you for that. items?
You know, I have one more question, if you don't mind.
Yep, go ahead.
I was wondering, have we ever done a trade before? And if so, how long has it been? I mean, has it been decades, or when was the last time we did?
We have
a
not.
land- We've never done it before?
Actually, I do need to clarify,
Oh.
we did. It was roughly 2017, and it was the trade of two parcels in the western portion of the district for the Challenger Center.
Oh, I
Okay.
apologize. I thought we were talking about closing schools.
Yes.
Oh, I was just wondering with it, since we're kind of focused on, well, that's the recommendation at this time is the trading. I was just wondering if we have had experience with this. And how, I mean, how does that work? How do you go about finding a fit? I mean, I don't even understand. Maybe you could walk me briefly through the process. I mean, I don't understand how it works. I mean, how do you locate someone that has about the same property that would be willing and interested in making basically a swap? So how does this work even?
I can provide just a very brief, high-level summary with that particular transaction. Of course, it was a prior administrative team who was part of that transaction, but there was an identified need for the district to acquire property that's on our Sunrise Mountain campus, adjacent to it, now part of the Sunrise Mountain campus. And hence there were appraisals of both properties, parcels, the structure that's on the property that's now adjacent to Sunrise Mountain. And that was then compared to the value of the two undeveloped parcels in the southwestern portion of the district, and they were deemed to be equal. And then through attorneys and governing board approval, the swap took place. And basically ownership was then transferred for all three properties to the respective parties.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
All right, just turn it off. Set it on. No further questions, comments? We'll move on to 3.4, Citizens Bond and Advisory Committee update.
Excuse me, I did have just a couple of
Oh, sure, go ahead.
comments.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I wasn't sure if anybody else was going to speak. So for the land swap, I'm glad you mentioned that, Michelle. I was going to mention the land swap for the Challenger. I'm kind of curious about what the developer did get for that land that we swapped, because I think they're all, both parcels, I think it's all built on at this time. But that's just aside. I guess thinking back, because I was on the board at that time, the comments that I'd heard about doing the land swap was just the reason that we had just mentioned, is that they didn't want a charter school coming in and picking up the Challenger Center so close to our school. I guess I don't want that happening again. I don't want us to make a decision based on what who might purchase the land. If we do that, if we do the land swap, we're not sure, and I know we're going to talk about the bond. If we don't get a bond, we're not going to build on it. So we're asking parents from those three schools and students from those three schools to be upended their lives in order to hold on to land that we potentially might not even be able to build on for years. The only thing in here that I really like, because I think it's so popular in the northern, is the traditional school. And I don't know if there would be a need for a traditional school for one of these three sites. So that's just my overview.
No, thank you for that. And as we work, as we talked about bringing stakeholders together, that would be an important piece before we would, if the governing board decides to close a school or all three schools, then before we can bring a recommendation to the governing board on what we would, let's just say the land swap is not viable, we're not able to sell the land, we need to repurpose it. What makes the most sense and what is the greatest need? And we would need to be working with the community, reaching out, seeing if, is that even a viable option? Or if our family's willing to travel to that area? And so we would need to do a lot of a lot of work with the community to see if that were a viable option.
So mine wouldn't be to move the north traditional to the south. Mine would be to have a second traditional in the south.
Right, and that's what that
Okay.
recommendation is. Mhm.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, no further questions, comments? We'll move on to 3.4, Citizens Bond and Advisory Committee update.
Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Reynolds, and Cabinet. I feel like we've just given an update on the 12th, and so I will be brief as we start. If we could go to the next slide, please. Not sharing the same information twice, but at a detailed enough level to build capacity on work that we've done in recent weeks, and most particularly with our Citizens Advisory Committee last week on May 18th. And so, of course, our work started back in January when the board did reconvene the Citizens Advisory Committee to evaluate whether or not the district should call for an election on November 8th related to a bond authorization. And if the recommendation was to call for an election, that the committee would also provide a recommendation on the dollar amount of the bond authorization and categories and associated dollar amounts with those categories. So moving on, and Kevin's actually helping me this evening with the slide presentation, we brought together initially 11 community members and district employees and representatives from parents and other stakeholder groups, and ultimately wrapped up with 10 committee members. And we've invited some of that group to join us on Thursday, where we'll formally recognize them. We do have one member in the audience. Mrs. Ray Conley did serve on the committee, so I do want to acknowledge her this evening. And then we met for a total of 6 times, and again, our last meeting was last week on May 18th. All of our meetings were open to the public here at the district office. All of the agendas published in board docs, materials from the meetings, as well as meeting minutes are also available to our governing board and community. And of course, I provided Friday reports along the way to the governing board. And so we've wrapped up as far as our meeting schedule. And early on, and I shared this information on the 12th, we did some foundational work with the committee to bring them up to speed. We had returning members as well as a number of new members, and so we wanted to provide background, an overview on school finance. We went into detail on the 2020 facility assessment and utilization study that took place, as well as some background information on the school facilities board and past election results. And then on the next slide, we also provided current data, including a public opinion poll that the committee asked administration to conduct, updated demographic and enrollment information. Mr. Molino with his team provided updated transportation, student bus needs, replacement cycle information, technology needs over the next 7 or so years. And then we also evaluated that 2020 study compared to where we are today and work we've done over the last few years. And I'll look at that in detail with you momentarily, as well as updated costs related to elementary construction, high school construction, and high school land costs. And then on the 18th, we wrapped up looking at 6 scenarios, possible bond authorizations related to those needs and updated costs that were provided along the way. We looked at the cost of an average bond election as well as election costs as a whole. Talked a little bit about what options exist, if any, if the district were ever to be asked to let part of our taxing jurisdiction out of the district's boundaries. We have a number of retirement communities, and that's oftentimes a question. And then, of course, there's a recommendation that was voted on last week. So over the next handful of slides, I'd like to provide some high-level highlights from all of that work over the 6 meetings that will help put together some context with the recommendation that we are presenting tonight, but formally bringing to the governing board on Thursday, May 26th. And with that, It was important for our committee to gain an understanding of property taxes, because when our community approves a bond authorization, they are committing secondary property taxes to pay for that bond authorization. And so we used example residences from the cities of both Peoria and Glendale, talked a little bit about the Maricopa County assessor and how assessed valuations are calculated. And even without a voter-approved initiative, there will always be an assessment per se for residential property owners because of the equalization formula and qualified tax rate. But then when there's an override or a bond, there's a special assessment, and it wouldn't necessarily just apply to Peoria Unified, because the Maricopa Community College's city that residence is in may also have bonds on the ballot. And so a real foundational discussion took place. We had guest speakers from Stiefel, Mr. Brian Lundberg and Ms. Randy Stein, who, Ms. Stein in particular, really provided thorough information not only on property taxes and assessment, but also the school facilities board and criteria to qualify for new construction or land through that agency. The public opinion poll, 400 likely voters, we did engage High Ground to conduct that survey. High Ground's president, Mr. Paul Bentz, did present to the committee, and he did walk through the questions. And what I have on this slide is a main takeaway. It shows priorities from our community. Of course, some of the data was mixed, meaning the reconfirmation that 70% of our community does not have students within the district, so we always have opportunities to ensure we're providing complete communication and information to our whole community, especially if they don't have students in the district. But here are the tiered priorities from those survey respondents, and you'll note that in descending order of importance, priority and essential projects really rose to the top of the list for a potential bond. That's very similar to the assessment study that we had in 2020 and some of the comments Mr. Molino made in his presentation earlier this evening, and I will also speak to it in this presentation. Anything that rated 3.5 or above was important to our community, but you'll see some of those essential projects: roofing, electrical, plumbing, buses for students, technology, all were at a higher ranking than the bottom tier, which included equipment, finishes, and new construction. However, you will note that just about every priority, with the exception rather of painting and finishes, was at 3.5 or above. And then on the next slide, just some additional comments on the school facilities board. There is a formula based on capacity for our elementary schools and our high schools, visible and invisible space, which in part takes into account any bond-funded additions that we've made over the years. And that calculation of capacity compared to enrollment will then trigger at certain points when we may qualify for new construction that would be funded through the School Facilities Board, or as they're now referred to, the School Facilities Oversight Board. And what we do know very clearly is that we will qualify for a high school before we'll qualify for an elementary school because of the mix of enrollment. We have a lower level of enrollment in some of our southern schools versus the pressure of the growth in the north. And so over the next year, we will continue to work with the School Facilities Board with our annual reporting and calculations to determine very clearly when we may be in line for a high school, or at a minimum the land for a high school. But we know that threshold has not been reached at this time, and it may be a period of time before we get there. But we did look at that in depth, and we also shared that information with the committee so they would understand how that formula works.
I just ask one question. You said a period of time. Do you have any indication of what that might be?
I will highlight at this point, and then I have another slide on enrollment. Pre-COVID, we were on a trajectory where we thought it would be just a few years. However, our enrollment decreased a bit and has started to rebound, but is a tad static right now. So we need to really resync where are we with that year-over-year ratable growth, where we could say with confidence it's a certain percentage a year, and then you apply that to the formula, and that would better identify when in the next few years we would qualify. Right now, we do not qualify, and it's not imminent in the near term per our current analysis. Thank you. And then speaking of enrollment, Mr. Moss and our vendor, Davis Demographics, provided a presentation to the committee as well and really highlighted the 4 areas that we have within the district, the 2 that are more in the southern region and then the 2 in the northern region. And what that information showed is we do have some declining enrollment at certain schools still in the southern portion. However, we have some significant pressures that were identified over a 10-year analysis, specifically with Frontier, Park Ridge, Sunset Heights, and Lake Pleasant, as well as Liberty High School, where all things being equal with the construction and people moving into the district, those pressures are going to be very significant. And so when Mr. Moss presented, he highlighted that for the committee. Again, that pressure is in the northern portion of our district. And I won't go into detail on this slide other than to acknowledge Mr. Molino did provide an overview of work that had been done to date and pending reports to the board, highlighting that we were in phase 2 and getting ready to move more into a phase 3 status related to our repurposing activity and how that could impact decisions, outcomes of that repurposing work. For instance, a land swap, would that then negate the need for land in a bond authorization, et cetera. Redistricting or district boundaries. We've had questions from our community in recent years from especially retiree communities. Cortabella is one that comes to mind, and some of the others to ask us to please release them from our taxing jurisdiction, that they don't have students within the district, and that they feel that they should be released. And a number of years ago, back in the 70s, there was some action related to Sun City many years ago with the district, and so community members point to that. But I can share, and here's the statute, Arizona Revised Statute 15460. The law changed, and at this point in time, districts cannot, at their own discretion, release communities from their jurisdiction, their taxing boundaries, but rather it would take an effort within that district's boundaries with the group that would like to be released through a petition. They would have to gather signatures. That petition then would have to be turned over and presented to the county school superintendent. It would have to be determined that it was more than 10% of the qualified electors residing in that district, and then it would have to actually be a ballot question, in part because if a group steps out, their tax responsibility then transfers to the remaining people within that jurisdiction. So we do not have the ability to release communities from the district. Also, we looked back, and there was a request specifically from our committee to look at the voter information pamphlets from our last several bond elections, including 2012, which was our last successful bond election. And of course, every year we provide in detail information on our 2012 authorization, which basically has wound down this year. But you'll notice the dollar amounts and the mix on the slide of the years where we've asked for new construction, or our most recent bond question was a critical needs bond, which really focused on those priority and essential projects, did not include new construction. It did include the land for a high school. So you can see the mix on the slide, which ones included new construction and the dollar amounts. So our committee was able to look at that past information in recent years as well. And then the question has come up many times, well, what does it cost to have an election? And the response is it depends. It depends if it's a presidential election, if it's a midterm, if we're the only entity going out, if there are multiple entities with multiple questions, because then you share the cost, if it's an in-person and a mail-in or all mail-in, all of those things come into play. What I can say is over our last 3 bond elections, looking back because of the timing of those elections when they took place, the cost ranged from $103,000 to $133,000. But an election can cost in excess of $300,000. Next slide, please. And then again, you've seen this information before. This is a summary from the 2020 facility assessment that was done in conjunction with the utilization study. As Mr. Molino mentioned, ADM Group did the facility assessment for us. And in 2020, there was a 15-year timeframe that was part of the analysis, and $301 million worth of projects were identified, ranging from high, medium, and low. High, of course, being those priority and essential. The roof is leaking, you need to replace it, or there's a problem with electrical or plumbing, restrooms, things of that nature. And some of the lower priority fall into the categories of finishes and interior upgrades that might be deemed a priority from an instruction perspective, but they wouldn't require us to do them initially. They could be last in line. They wouldn't be as essential. And then with that, we pared back the 15 years to 5 years. What would be the total of the projects to be covered over a 5-year period, and then within that 5 years, which ones were priority and essential, critical, had to be addressed. And that total was $119.8 million, and you'll recall that in part became the basis of our 2020 critical needs bond that we asked the voters to consider. And then Mr. Molino helped us put together this at a glance. It helps define what's an essential project, what's a critical project. These are top of mind for us because, again, if you don't address them, you can create long-term issues, not only for our campus, but safety issues for people to be on that campus, students to be on that campus. And you could actually incur more costs down the road. It's similar to when you're not maintaining a car, and then all of a sudden you have a very expensive repair. So again, looking at that shorter planning horizon, essential and critical projects. And then Mr. Molino with his team actually helped compile and identify what have we done over the last couple of years to continue to address those projects that are first in line. And of course, you'll recall when we started looking at this, we still had some of our 2012 bond dollars that we were able to allocate. Capital allocations each year, as well as we've been aggressively applying for SFB grants where appropriate, and we actually did receive 2 grants for roof replacements, both at Ironwood High School and Centennial, and I know you've seen those in our consent agendas when we've had procurement activity related to those projects. So with the work that Mr. Molino did, we identified $31.6 million of completed essential and priority critical projects over the last couple of years. And here on this next slide, you'll see a detail of the areas of focus with those projects, again, with mixed funding sources. And then Mr. Molino and his team, using that updated reconciliation and then applying an inflation factor, determined that we still have pending approximately $97 million of projects that will need to be addressed in the next 5 years. Of course, the inflation component back in 2019, I don't think anyone could have identified that we would be looking at 10% plus inflation. Nationally, it's roughly 8.5. In Arizona, it's higher, which is interesting. And then, of course, in the construction industry, it can be significantly higher, but we were kind of conservative, middle of the road, and went with the 10% for that inflation factor. And so with that, going to the next slide, as we started to look at 6 possible bond authorizations to share with our committee at the last meeting, I wanted to take soft costs that were identified in the initial study, which includes architect fees, taxes, financing costs when you have a bond sale, insurance, et cetera, and then by category, elementary, high school, and district facilities with a weighted allocation, allocated those costs across the board to the work that Kevin did with his updated analysis and reconciled projects. And that allowed us to then break out by category the $97 million worth of projects in the far right column by elementary school, high school, and district facilities, because when we have a bond election in the voter pamphlet, we break out the categories of projects in a similar manner. And so this information also was shared with the committee. And then here you'll see an at a glance. In total, the construction component for the essential and critical projects, as well as transportation, bus replacement, student activity vehicles, technology, infrastructure, student and staff laptop device replacement, because again, there's a useful life. We're working with roughly a 7-year planning horizon with this analysis. Then the cost of high school land, $15 million. That's higher than it was when we went out in 2020. It was approximately $13 million at that time. The cost of new high school construction adjusted for inflation, as well as new elementary school construction. So in total, if you look at all of these projects and needs, we're in excess of $318 million. That information was shared with the committee. And then, of course, we also looked at what's our capacity, because the district can only incur debt or have bond authorizations that are within our bonding capacity. We currently have $167 million of outstanding bond sales from prior programs, 1996, 2002, 2005, 2012. We are rapidly amortizing and paying off those past bond sales, but we have to look at what's still outstanding, coupled with what's our capacity, which is 20% of our full cash assessed valuation right now within the district. That's $3.3 billion. And so with outstanding bond sales, we have just under $500 million of bonding capacity, 497.5 to be exact, and the district's credit rating is strong at an AA negative from Standard & Poor's. So we've shared that if there had been a recommendation, we're poised. We have capacity within certain dollar amounts. And as I've also shared, in combination with our M&O override and existing bond sales, we've had a declining tax rate in recent years, and we're very focused on the tax rate for our community. And so the committee was aware of that as well. And so we looked at 6 scenarios, ranging from $275 million to $150 million, keeping in mind that we would want a stable tax rate with the amortization of 25 years. Again, similar to a mortgage, when you do a bond sale, it's paid back over time. And here on the side, you'll see the average tax for new bond sales within these pro formas for an average home with a value which is per $100 of limited assessed valuation per $100,000. Here is the annual estimated cost. So the committee had that information as well. And then we went into a comprehensive discussion, and the committee saw in detail 6 scenarios, including the associated tax rate with each scenario. And here I have an at-a-glance for you that basically shows the range. And in the far left column, you'll see we started with that, and I've rounded down, $318 million of comprehensive needs. And then with each scenario, as we reduced and took away to bring that down, we also had varying local contributions, meaning district capital or school facility board grants that we believe we may be eligible for, ranging, and again, these were estimates and just scenarios to land on an even bond authorization ranging from $35.2 million to $43 million. And then you can see in the third column from the left, the corresponding potential bond authorization syncing up with those 6 scenarios that I just shared with you. The takeaway and the interesting component is the $275 million scenario, a comprehensive bond, would address all of the needs that were identified for new construction, purchase of land for a new high school, as well as the priority and essential repair and construction projects, technology purchases, as well as school bus and student transportation purchases. Each scenario that was looked at after that first scenario had a modification to bring the price down. And so, for instance, with the second scenario, the $250 million bond, it had all of the needs except a new elementary school. The third scenario, the $225 million, included all of the needs, elementary new construction, high school land purchase, but then partial construction for a high school. There wouldn't have been enough capacity to build the full high school at the $125 million. So that scenario would necessitate perhaps opening in stages, building part of the campus, and then using another bond to finish it. And you really had that with both the $225 million and the $200 million scenarios. And then the last two, you start getting into almost a version of a critical needs bond or a partial bond. And so with the $175 million in that case, you would have new high school and elementary construction and technology purchases, but limited transportation. And you would not have the ability to address the priority or essential projects. And then with the last scenario, the $150 million, that would include all of the needs, elementary construction and high school land, but no high school construction. So again, you have to make trade-offs if you have a lower authorization. So the committee looked at that information and the 6 scenarios that were provided, and there was conversation around those scenarios. Again, administration was not recommending any of these scenarios. These were simply for discussion purposes to help the committee see that depending on the size of the bond, you can do more or less. And the committee's takeaway was there was a concern that there are comprehensive needs that have been identified for some time, and that if you don't have the right-sized bond, you're actually possibly incurring more of an expense down the road because you're not addressing the need when it exists with a properly sized bond. And so there was some commentary, the critical needs bond, for instance, that we went out for in 2020. So very good discussion with the committee. And ultimately, the committee wanted, well, and let me take a step back, they took action. And the action was that the district should not call for an election on November 8th, 2022. And that motion passed 5-4. And the reason for that with that conversation is time would be very important. There were open items related to repurposing. There are also next steps, better refining our enrollment numbers and projections as we come out of COVID and students have started to return and will fully return, and with movement of people moving into the district and new developments, all of that becomes part of the equation. Also updating when would we be qualifying for SFB funding. Those were some of the discussion points, but also there's a need for a comprehensive bond. There's that hyper growth, that pressure in the northern part of the district that's impactful, it's impacting families. And yet we then still have some movement with our enrollment in the southern portion. But a non-negotiable is the repairs. They're not going away. They need to be addressed. Buses have a useful life technology. So there was a lot of good discussion, a lot of thoughtful discussion. The committee this year worked very well together. It was a very respectful committee, even though people had different opinions. Everyone had the ability to share their voice and their thoughts. And this is the recommendation that came out of the committee's work. We will bring this formal recommendation back, I will, with administration on Thursday to the governing board to accept. But this is a preview tonight as well as an in-depth discussion of the work, the information that was shared, the conversation, and where we landed as a committee. And with that, I'll conclude the presentation and I can answer any questions that you have as well as Mr. Molino. And I'd like to thank Kevin for the work that he did as well, providing information. It was truly a team effort.
President Sandoval, if I can just jump in again.
Sure.
I want to thank Ms. Myers and Mr. Molino for their work, as well as the entire committee, as you can see in the 5-4 vote, that these decisions are difficult. And there's lots of reasons on both sides and talking and lots of consequences to a lot of those decisions. It's important, and Ms. Myers let the committee know that, you know, as we look to the future, we have some pretty intense needs, and that it is important that if we do not go out into 2022, that we have some resources to be able to survive over the next year, but that we will definitely need to be looking to address those needs in 2023.
Yeah, thank you for that. And Ms. Myers, Mr. Molino, thank you both for this, for stepping up right, and leading this team and this process to get us to this point, so I really appreciate it. Board members, questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
Yeah, I appreciate all the time and the effort that went into coming up with this conclusion and all of the work that this committee put forth to make this decision. It was a close call, you know, it was 5-4. I'm not exactly sure how they came across this determination, but with the economy the way it is, I'd be really, really, really surprised if it would pass. People are having problems paying for gas. So I understand on that level, maybe waiting until the next year when possibly things are in a better place and people will feel more forthcoming about, you know, giving a little bit more because people are tightening up their belt straps here. So it's tough. It's really tough. So we're going to have to tighten up our belt straps too. So we will find a way. There's always a way. So, but I appreciate all the time that went into coming up with this decision. Thank you.
And let me just jump in, recommendation.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Ms.
And I just want to
Pingerelli, go ahead.
And I just want to clarify, right, that the committee's made a recommendation to the governing board. The governing board has the final say.
Representative Pingerelli, you good? Or?
I have a question that I guess I can sneak into this discussion. It's, I know we talked briefly, I just went back, and you can tell me if I can't ask it. So if we were to sell land, property, and the voters approve that sale, and where does that money have to go to? Is that paying down debt?
Mrs. Pingerelli, per statute, one of the options is to pay down debt. It can also be used to pay for capital needs or M&O needs. There's some bright line guidance on before 2016 and after, and I'll put this in a Friday report for you. But within the statute, you can see the relevant criteria, and one option is to pay down debt.
Okay, thank you.
Senator?
Yeah, no, again, appreciate all of the effort, your team, and definitely the committee and just everyone who's been involved for a lot of years, some people. But I was curious, so we obviously, you know, are recognizing this recommendation for this year. The question I was thinking is just, you know, how soon can we reconvene or reestablish that committee as necessary to have a jump on 2023 as opposed to having to wait, you know, like we have in the past?
I'll try again. I can certainly speak to that. I don't believe within the district's governing board policy there's a restriction on when the committee can be reconvened. That is at the direction of the governing board, and of course policy defines what the committee's work is. It's an extension of the governing board, and the board approves the scope and purpose. We would want to check with Maricopa County Elections perhaps on what their criteria is. They always notify us what the deadline is to call for an election, and there's a notification that goes out 6 months before the election. But I would want to check to see, is there a beginning date that you can't exceed, meaning if we called for an election November of 2023, is that valid, or is there a window that you call each November? So that's something we can also provide to the governing board.
I think one of the key components to that is, and again, I appreciate all the work that Ms. Myers and this committee did, but the heavy lift with the information and really taking the deep dive into the data, that was done. And so my recommendation to the board would be that we would look very soon after the fall and when we have a better picture of where we are to address that.
Yeah, that's great. I think the more time we have, the better, right? As long as it's working with the other pieces that are going along. But thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Ms. Myers, can you talk a little bit, and you don't have to go back to the slide, about the public opinion survey? I mean, it makes sense how the top items certainly were prioritized, but I mean, I live in the northern sector of the district and, attending school events, et cetera. I hear often, we need a new school, new high school, elementary school. So it's surprising to me that it was as low as it was, on the list. So I guess my question is, when you take a look at the 400 individuals, I mean, what's the profile of those individuals? I don't need to know names, but I mean, like, what's the profile of the individuals who actually took the survey? Are they?
Well, and I can certainly also provide in a Friday report the summary. Of course, High Ground is the firm that conducted the survey, and so their information that was shared with the district, it was of likely voters, balanced for voter turnout. And so they felt the snapshot was going to be very representative of the voter turnout in the November election, and was not one-sided, it was across the board. But again, I don't have that committed to memory. I can certainly provide that. It was their firm's poll, and they're a professional firm that does this all of the time.
And I think that data point that we talk about very frequently, English teacher, about 70% of our voting population do not have students in our district. And so it does not surprise me that some of the data that might come back from a poll of likely voters would not necessarily match up with what we might hear from community members with students in schools.
No, agreed. And it's just, I mean, the data with regard to our schools and, again, the northern sector of our district, I hate saying that, but the northern sector of our district, it's just, we talk about student success and we talk about, ensuring that we are intentional about making sure that they all are given an equitable opportunity to be successful, right? And putting our teachers and staff in a position to be successful, classroom sizes, et cetera. And for understand, I mean, and this was just in conversation, I mean, it's, I know Liberty has a capacity of 2,100 students, and I think their 10-day approximation is like 2,700 students. And you talked about, Sunset Heights, you talked about, Vistancia, Lake Pleasant, and then Park West, that community that's being developed, and Mr. Moss knew all this. And I know I'm speaking to the choir in this room, but I guess, as we go to market, whether we go out this year or next year, what I would hate to happen is, because I don't know what our capacity is and how long we can sustain without a bond, right? So maybe that's one question. And what I would hate to happen is if the community continues to not, I guess, support the district in a way that impacts our entire community, whether you have kids in your home or not. We're going to go backwards, and then those individuals who continue to vote against funding for public schools or PUSD or Pure Unified, sorry, Danielle, it's that they'll begin to see the impact. But then at that point, we're behind the 8 ball, and we are putting our kids, those lives, in a position, a negative position for sure. So I guess my question is, how long can we sustain without a bond?
President Sandoval, members of the governing board, we need a bond. We don't have a mechanism with the annual funding from the state to address all of the needs that I shared this evening, as well as needs related to new construction. To answer your question related to Liberty High School as an example, by 2031, the enrollment projection is at 3,226, yet the capacity is at 2,109. So we know, especially in our northern portion with those 5 schools, there's an extreme pressure that not only has been applied, but will continue to grow. And so the committee weighed in on this as well, that it would be important not to try for another critical needs or priority and essential project bond, but to really look at the need in the north related to construction. It is affecting families. As people make decisions, there is not a high school within the proximity. Looking at the growth out by Vistancia, going north toward Lake Pleasant, it's going to be impactful. And you're exactly right. There's a timing. You pass the bond, but then the authorization, I should say, and then yet there's the timing of the bond sales. And then there's also the ability to have contractors that are available to do the work. In fact, with some of the grant funding that's come through the federal government at a state level, we're hearing a number of districts and other entities that are using that funding to initiate projects. They're utilizing contractors that then aren't available to other entities, and it's really causing this backlog along with the supply chain, the inflation. It's very important that we're able to pass a bond at some point in the very near future. And I'll say that from a finance perspective.
Yeah, agreed 100%. And I think for me, I mean, from a messaging standpoint, I know we've used a particular contractor year over year to help us go to market, you know, for our bonds and overrides, and we've been successful, right? Obviously, we were successful in 2012, but I mean,
clarify, an action committee might, the district has never used a contractor. I want to just clarify that, please.
Sorry, you're right. So the PAC has used a particular contract. Thank you for clarifying. The PAC has used a particular contractor year over year. I'm not sure who was used in 2012, and maybe we can glean some, you know, best practices there. But everything you said is correct. I mean, you know, an investment in knowledge pays the biggest dividends, and I think that type of communication and understanding of just how it's impacting lives, and maybe applying more of a humanistic message into our communications to the community may move individuals in our direction. I get that this is a heavy lift with regard to the potential repurposing, you know, of these sites, and that's a lot to take on, you know, with regard to the district and your already limited capacity, right? You know, as you continue to nurture and restore and recover, you know, our students moving forward. But, you know, if the decision is to not go out this year, I'm assuming 2023 being an off year, the expense to go out in 2023 is on the higher end of that range that you showed. Is that correct?
President Sandoval, that is correct. But if you look at it from a big picture perspective, it's a differential of maybe $150,000. But failed elections that are occurring regularly are more expensive. And I know the committee felt it was important that the timing would support a potentially successful outcome. And I will also say we have the ability to navigate a year. I'll say that with confidence, to wait and to honor the committee's recommendation.
And what I was going to jump in with, and when Ms. Meyer says navigate, you know, you have, you know, raised a very valid concern. Navigate means survive. It doesn't, you know, we're going to be taking care of safety needs. We're going to be taking care of base needs as we work to, you know, with the board on what a 2023 election might look like. But it will be, you know, we're committed to obviously that base level of support, and that we're going to be working hard to work with our community so that they understand exactly how important 2023 will be.
Dr. Reynolds, if I may add too, one reason also why we're in the position we are is the ESSER funding allowed us to make investments in technology that normally would have needed to have been in a bond. And that is one mechanism that we've used to survive. However, the investments we've made in recent years with the ESSER funding has a useful life. It has an end date and a cycle, a replacement cycle, and so embedded in the technology number are Mr. Molino's projections. But I just want to clarify, the ESSER funding helped us survive on the technology side as well.
No, that's great. And Dr. Reynolds, thank you for saying what you just said. I mean, there's no doubt, and I appreciate the fact that the district continues to problem solve, right? But at some point, even the greatest minds and coming up with the best solutions we may not have the resources, meaning the finances, to be able to address or develop those solutions to the problems that we're solving. And yeah, I'm
100%.
not asking you to respond. I mean, I know you get it. But what's the recommendation of the district regarding going out for the bond this year?
The committee's recommendation is the district's recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Merrill? All right. Ms. Myers, as always, thank you very much. Mr. Molino, thank you both. Appreciate it.
So just as a follow-up as we conclude, next steps will be Thursday evening. Ms. Myers will bring a brief presentation to the board, and then we'll have an action item on Thursday night for the board to consider.
I do have one really quick question for Ms. Molino or Ms. Myers. When we talk about essential and critical projects, and knowing the data that we have in front of us regarding the need for schools, where does a new school sit in those two? I didn't see it listed in any one of those two columns on that slide.
We'll go back to the summary slide if
Maybe I
if we
missed it.
can.
No, I think what he's referring to is when we talk about critical and essential, those are base level safety, right? We look at new construction in a different bucket.
And actually, if
So
you
although
go,
it is absolutely critical and essential, right, it is, we look at those two as different things.
if you go up
It's
2
two,
slides, please.
That's okay, that's okay.
Go up 2 slides. Well, if I may, one more slide, please, Kevin. One more. This is what is included in the dollar amount for priority and essential projects. There was a separate line item on a subsequent slide that showed the dollar amount for the priority and essential technology, buses, and then new construction. So we do treat them as separate. And with technology, I'd like to add just an asterisk to my comment, is ESSER and E-rate grants. The two in combination is how we've addressed our need.
Thank you. Anything else, sir?
No, again, just thank you, Ms. Myers, Mr. Molino, and the entire committee for your work. It is one of the most interesting, challenging, and hopefully rewarding committees that the board has.
All right, if no further questions, comments, I do need a motion to adjourn at 7:46. Sure.
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second that. Ms. Contra, we have a motion by Ms. Underhill, and a second by myself. Can you run us through a voice vote?
Aye.
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 So motion passes 5-0. All right, everybody, thank you. Have a great evening. Stay safe.